Arise international correspondent Adefemi Akinsanya, who is in Washington, D.C., joins us now to give us an update on the situation of things in one of the key battleground states. Adefemi, good to have you on Newsday.
Good to be here on Newsday. Good morning. Well, it's afternoon there to you, isn't it? So good afternoon to you, Temi Talk. Good afternoon to you all.
All right. So tell us.
Let's talk about this now. Go ahead.
Oh, please,
go ahead.
Bring us up to speed, on what's happening in Washington, D.C. What's the mood like at the moment?
Temi Talk, life has gone back to normal almost immediately. The mood on the streets here is one of calm and tranquil. We are, of course, very, very close to the Capitol building. It's quite a poignant and iconic part of Washington, D.C. But when you see the mood of the people here, it does seem as though everyone is just slipped back into normal. This is, of course, still a normal working day. Yesterday, of course, was election day, and then there was the entire night of counting votes, looking at what projections we're looking at. And here in a new day, it does seem as though, even though Kamala Harris did win Washington, D.C. and secure the electoral votes associated with it, she clearly didn't win the election, and it does seem as though that disappointment is reverberating around the community here. That being said, it is definitely a huge and momentous comeback that Donald Trump has been able to successfully do and accomplish in being re-elected as the 47th President of the United States. And so when you look at the journey of him being able to find his way back into the White House, it is one that perhaps didn't seem to be the clearest. Now, I think that when he was up against Donald Trump, that is, when he was up against Joe Biden, and they were going ahead to this campaign, heading towards election day, it did feel as though Donald Trump was a far more formidable candidate over Joe Biden. There was so much focus on Joe Biden's age, his health, whether or not he could string sentences together, whether or not he had the fight left in him, not only to beat Donald Trump in this election, but also if he were to secure another term, whether or not he'll be able to stay in office. So in comes, of course, after that disastrous debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, in comes Kamala Harris, and it did seem to be such a very quick and vast baptism of fire. A lot of money was thrown behind Kamala Harris, a lot of anticipation, but that clearly has not translated into the most important statistic, which is the ballot votes. Who people voted for, who they chose, the electoral votes associated with them. Kamala Harris clearly went wrong in so many different areas, and if over time we're going to be able to take a look at the electorate and look at where people voted, but it did seem as though she was unable to resonate with men in more rural areas. If we look at the swing states, as you mentioned, we were in Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania is a huge state, but in Philadelphia, where most votes went to the Democrats, it did show that in modern cities, in more metropolitan areas, more people are likely to have thrown their weight behind the Democrats, thrown their weight behind Kamala Harris. So we saw the outcomes of the election in Pittsburgh, in Pennsylvania, in Scranton, but also in Philadelphia rather, and in Scranton. But then when you look at more rural areas of the state, it is almost all red for Donald Trump. And we were seeing trickles of that yesterday, with more and more people coming out as the vote counting process came on and said Trump is going to win, he's who we want. And so when we break down the campaigns of each candidate, it does seem as though with what we see now, Donald Trump was able to simply respond and resonate with far more people in the electorate across the country. He talked very, very clearly about his plans for making people more prosperous despite this cost of living crisis. So for example, the United States has a huge tipping culture. He talked about how he's not going to tax tips. That is something that connects with almost every working class person that we have spoken to. People who drive Ubers, people who wait and are restaurateurs, people who are dependent on those types of incomes. They definitely resonated with a candidate who says that they're going to protect those pockets of their income. So it does seem as though Kamala Harris, for many reasons and small reasons, big and small, hasn't been able to capitalize on the support that she had. And I do think that sometimes what we've learned in this election here is sometimes the candidate that has the most noise around them, the most celebrity endorsement, it doesn't always translate into the most important thing, whether or not people are going to vote for her. If we break down these votes, it does seem as though there was an anticipation that the Democrats, that Kamala Harris, were going to be able to first and foremost take control of the already existing Democratic strongholds and then appeal to more voters. And it does seem as though with all of the money that she was able to get in crowdfunding, in fundraising, she was able to appeal to new voters. But it does seem as though her base that she was already relying on slipped away from her hand, slipped out of her grasp. Millions of votes, some 15 millions of votes of people who just didn't show up for her. And so if we break that down to look across demographic lines, it's going to be gender, white women in areas that are more metropolitan, white men in areas that are more rural, and why it is that they didn't feel as though, despite the power behind the machine, clearly they just didn't believe in a presidency that would be led by Kamala Harris.
And definitely I guess America has spoken. And one of the questions on a lot of people's minds, Adefemi, is Donald Trump's legal woes. It seems like he not only beat Kamala Harris, he also seems to have beaten the system that was working quite hard to put him behind bars. He's the first former president to ever be charged with and convicted of felonies, first convicted felon to ever win a presidential election. This virtually guarantees that he will be putting himself in that immunity seat to try and get a lot of these charges dropped and a lot of the settlements thrown out, because we know he's racked up millions of dollars worth of legal fees, and that will also be expunged. And of course, all the Jack Smiths and all the other individuals and Fani Willis's who got reelected, all those individuals who have worked tirelessly to bring cases against him, it seems that in the next 2 months, everything is going to crumble very soon and very fast.
Well, this is it. It does seem as though Trump is the candidate who has more than 9 lives, who's been able to overcome everything, his legal woes, convictions. Him being a convicted felon is something that people don't use as an insult. It is quite literally the truth. But that clearly hasn't done something to hurt. It may well have hurt any other politician, any other political candidate, but it does seem that for Donald Trump and the person that he is, the cult of personality that he's been able to cultivate, is just something that doesn't penetrate his image and clearly hasn't penetrated his base or his votes going forward. So it will be interesting to see what his first moments will be like once he does resume office come January 2025, when he is inaugurated, whether or not these prosecutors, as you mentioned, Alan Smith, whether or not they will continue on in this quest to get him punished for these crimes, or whether, again, because this is going to be happening under a very, very powerful new President Trump, it's unlikely that it's going to be something that desperately or damagingly affects his presidency. Now, I did mention that Donald Trump is going to be one of the more powerful presidents, and that's because not only has he been able to secure the popular vote, the electoral college vote, he also has the Senate, he also has Congress in his favor. So you can imagine that all tiers of government are aligning behind him. So this is a powerful moment for anybody in this position, but it's very interesting to see that it is Donald Trump. If we look at this internationally now, what does this mean for the rest of the world? What does this mean for different conflicts? You know, in his campaign, he talks about how he'd be able to end the war in Ukraine like that, even before inauguration. We're waiting to see how that's going to happen, whether or not that will happen, what effect his presidency will have now in the situation that we're seeing in the Middle East. Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump have historically been good friends, good allies, especially when President Trump was in office and moved the US embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Whether or not his relationship with Saudi Arabia will be able to cool tensions finally in the Middle East, we still don't know. For Africa, it's going to be very interesting. Trump seems to be very popular across African countries, in Nigeria too. And you'd have to ask yourself why. I do think that if you look at the Nigerian public, perhaps they are more comfortable with conservative politicians. They like the idea of a strong man, a man who speaks without any type of worries of being politically correct. But let's not forget too that Donald Trump does have work to do to build respect, mutual respect with the developing world, with developing countries. We will not forget how he referred to Nigeria and other countries in the global south as S-hole countries. People haven't forgotten that. And if they have, they should remember that that is how the president spoke about their country. And you should be able to ask him and make him feel as though that internationally speaking, he does have a responsibility to treat other countries with a sense of respect. Following that too, world organizations like NATO, what are they going to be feeling like? How are they going to be preparing? You'll remember that a few years ago when Trump was in power, and even thereafter, he talked about how NATO and other NATO countries weren't really pulling their weight. He threatened to pull US funding, remove itself from the treaty organization. So again, a lot of people shaking themselves up with the news that come January 2025, Trump is back in office.
Well, Adefemi Akinsoya, Arise international correspondent, reporting live from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsday.